There he is, folks. If you're watching on YouTube on my website, it's Teague Balen. If you're just listening on audio, how's it, Teague? Welcome to our show, man. How are you?
Very good, Mark. Great to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. Look, I appreciate you. And before I let you introduce yourself, I must say this. I appreciate you for the truth you bring on social media when it pertains to golf improvement. And I appreciate you even more because I don't think you will remember, but a couple of years back, I made some quip on social media there, and you called me out. And I was, this is cool. I have some respect for this guy, so I appreciate you, man. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is, being on TV is a very, very difficult thing. So I don't think I could pull it off talking as much as you guys are forced to and fill that air. So it actually is very impressive. So I'm not sure I'm even capable of filling all that time. So anyways.
Well, you're a fascinating follow. That's how I found you on Instagram, and there was an Instagram story we're going to dive into. But before we do that, let's put you into context for our global fans. Tell us about you and how you came to where you are, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to kind of like 2007,
Mm-hmm.
where was just finished up my junior career, was kind of a mediocre player, right?
Right.
I could not really compete with the best players. I'm from Canada, so I'm from kind of Edmonton, Alberta area. For people, that's about a 6-hour drive north of Montana. So I'm up there a bit.
I'm guessing you were a hockey player as well, right?
Yeah, I played probably till I was about 12, and then basketball, and then I turned it into golf primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, it was probably when I really started getting into instruction. I was working at the club, my local club, but I didn't feel like I really knew anything. And if you go back then, it's kind of 2007. We're early into YouTube. The iPhone, I think, was released that year. So like trying to get your hands on information, it was kind of books, DVDs, and primarily magazines.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. I think at that time I still had dial-up internet, so I couldn't even download anything really.
Lord,
Right.
how did we survive?
Right. And I remember my father bringing home the June 2007 Golf Digest.
Okay.
And it was the cover story was like the 14 or 15 pages, and it was titled "The Swing Whisperers." And people will know this as the kind of first ever Stack and Tilt article, right? So Andy Plummer, Mike Bennett. This is the one where Aaron Baddeley, there's all these different images of Aaron Baddeley as they talk you through the way they teach. And at that time, they were, helping players like crazy on the PGA Tour. Guys left, right, and center were winning as Mike and Andy taught them. Mm-hmm. And I personally, being Canadian, Mike Weir was a big deal for me, right? 2003 when he won the Masters, he was kind of the inspirational figure, alongside with Tiger, of course. But the reason I was drawn to this article was that it was kind of the first time that in a magazine there was something that kind of had some substance to it.
Right.
I felt like, oh, there's a little more depth and detail here, mm-hmm. right? The article mentioned Golfing Machine, of course, and those guys had spent time with Mac O'Grady. So that was what really sparked me in the instruction side. Fast forward 2 years later, I decided I want to kind of go down that path. I go from Canada to Vegas, and I joined the UNLV PGM program.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had a lot of fun there.
I'm sure
the first thing I would say is, like, the first week of school, they gave you the PGA teaching manual, because ultimately that was what I was interested in. I've never really been all that interested in the operational side of golf, right?
No.
And I couldn't believe it that was 2009 now, and they handed me the 1990 PGA teaching manual.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, well, this is like 20 years behind, right? So there's this discrepancy, and at that time, launch monitors were really booming, right? And everyone's trying to learn as much as they could about that. Motion capture is getting more popular. And so that's why I was drawn to Mike and Andy, and I ended up spending probably 4 or 5 schools with them.
Okay.
Over the next couple of years, that led me to spend some time with Mac O'Grady. Interestingly enough, I spent 7 straight days with him, roomed with him. So a very, very unique experience.
Okay. This was intimate.
Yeah. Went to a couple more of his schools. Then, since I was in Vegas around that 2011, 2012 period, I got to know a lot of guys you would have heard of, like Joseph Mayo and Jeff Smith, and got to know Dana Dahlquist and Grant Wade a little bit. Spent a lot of time around those guys. For a while, Jeff and I even taught at the same indoor academy.
Okay.
And then I kind of graduated. That took me and I moved back to Canada, worked at a private club teaching here for about 5 years. At one other point, 2018, Jeff Smith and I joined forces again, and I helped basically him build his membership site.
All right.
You might have heard of Course Kings.
Yeah.
Obviously, he had Jeff Pierce on there, Shaheen was on there, Fawcett for a time, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So really focused in that, was still teaching at the club a little bit. Pandemic comes, I kind of shift away from traditional instruction, do a lot of stuff online, teaching people from all over the world,
Yeah.
predominantly.
Mhm.
And then also stepped away and actually was doing some kind of continuing education on the business side of things, so not even golf related. And that kind of brings me here today. So yeah.
Well, I like the take. I like the take also, and this is why I'm really interested in the topic you just pitched out of the blue, and it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, to be honest. Because when people go to the internet or podcasts or all these media that you reference, it's the same sort of stuff largely. People talking about, and there's always fads like wrist flexion or lack thereof, or spine angles and tilts and stuff. There are these buzzwords that sort of go around the place all the time. But you always seem to come at the thing from a slightly different angle, and from the Course King's point of view, that's why I like the way you think about the game. And so, with that being said, I want to dive in and I want to pitch it to you. Now, I don't have the Instagram post in front of me because I think it was a story, but you pitch, I remember what it looked like. It was a black screen with white writing, so it stood out right away. And I'm flipping through there, and I have a look, and I stop, and there you are. You're like, okay, a player when he plays an 18, he or she plays 18 holes of golf. It's going to take how many minutes were you actually hitting shots? What was the number? You pitched a number over there.
Yeah. So I basically said, like, if you take for an average player, maybe a round of golf, 4 hours and 15 minutes would
Right.
be a nice pace. Like a lot of clubs would like that pace, right? And so basically the premise was that like 19 or 20% of the time I said was you actually playing golf.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the other 80% was
You're
you
not.
filling in the time, right?
Exactly.
And I came up with that number based on, I just took, say you shot 72, and I think the rules of golf permit 40 seconds per shot.
Yeah.
That's how I simply came up with that number, right? And then that became what you were interested in was, yeah, how do you because I mentioned you're spending a lot of time walking, potentially talking, waiting, all those sorts of things. So how do you play your best golf when you're still confronted with all this time that you have to fill?
It's, I think, the age-old challenge, because more than once, when I've been on the air or whatever, and back when I used to teach full time, I would spend time with players saying, look, essentially, if you're another sport, you're having the opposite coach calling timeout on you after every shot that you've hit. They're breaking your flow or your momentum or whatever it might be. So I want to dive in. Let's talk about this proper use of time, and I want to go from, okay, before the round to into the round, and then some practice time as well. So let's advise folks, and I know this is generic, because not everyone has an hour to go and hit balls before they play or whatever the case might be. But let's talk about the important game is coming up. You want to beat your buds or the member guest or whatever. So you are now wanting to go and perform your best. Let's talk about time spent before the round and how important that is.
Yeah, so like you said, that's going to vary on the individual, but I think we would all like to get to the course at a decent time,
Yeah.
get a warm up in.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously I've, in my past years, studying and whatnot, done a lot of TPI stuff, done a lot of stuff from the Gray Institute, 3D maps,
Yeah.
some other stuff like that. And, I think you want to have some quick warm up, right? So there's different ways you can warm up, right? You could warm up individual joints,
Mm-hmm.
joint by joint, right? Or you could try and warm yourself up more like plane of motion by plane of motion,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I usually try and help people have a handful of just exercises that they quickly warm their body up.
Yeah, so not necessarily like, oh my goodness, I'd bounce out of the car, I go hustle down to range, make a few swings, not even loosening up, stretching, none of that. No body preparation. It's just this mindset of like, oh sweet Jesus, help me find a few decently struck golf shots today.
Yeah, and we know, these people we're trying to help are very sedentary. They sit the majority of their day,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't take long coaching a lot of golf to realize these people's hips don't really work like they're supposed to. Their shoulders don't work very well. Their T-spine, their neck, it's not going to be very hard to run into those problems. So it's almost kind of crazy that people will just get up out of the car, maybe straight to the range, hit a handful of balls and be on their way. Like it's almost dangerous to a certain extent, right? So yeah, and then hit a few. Do you have to hit that many balls? No, I would just rather be more warm than I am.
Yeah.
Hit a lot of balls. Obviously people can putt, chip a little bit, and then I'd head to the tee.
I want to stall you for a second there.
Yeah.
Thinking back, way back now, because I'm 51, aging gracefully. When I was competing, I always seemed to find that I played my best when I had a utterly crappy warm-up. Now hitting shots. I don't know if it dialed me in mentally more, or maybe it modified the shot selection I try to apply when I was out on the golf course. But for the longest time, I spent time when I was warming up trying to hit and hit and hit and hit and hopefully just hit one good one. So somehow my confidence was up. And looking back now, that was massively debilitating, honestly.
Yeah, when I look back at my junior years, I was predominantly trying to find things, especially competitive golf before the round, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a weird situation quite regularly where, everyone gets first tee nerves and definitely more so in competition. But it wasn't uncommon for me to have a really, really bad first hole and then be good.
Yeah.
Right. Like it just eased me down,
Mm-hmm.
and I was kind of got into the flow of things and was far more comfortable after that. So yeah, I can attest to and agree with bad warm-ups actually.
So essentially we advising folks to, spend more time stretching, more time limbering up, loosening up the joints, the plane movement you discuss. Let's talk about now they do hit a few shots, because ordinarily you'll find the club golfer will get to the range. If we're lucky, they'll hit a 7-iron or 2, and then it's out with a driver and they're swinging for the fences. I want you to talk about that. And then if you've got time, what sort of clubs should you go? And then also, I find it becomes rapid fire with so many club golfers when they're loosening up or warming up. Whereas if you go on the PGA Tour, there's a hit, a turnaround, a talk, maybe the clean the clubs before you go. It's a lot more pedestrian an exercise on the tour. Now, granted, they are giving themselves more time to prepare.
Yeah, I don't know if I have really great guidelines for the average golfer for how many to hit with each club.
Yeah.
I don't even think you need to work through the entire bag.
No.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just a gradual flow with the time you have, and get enough swings in that you're like, okay, I got a good shot. I got a good shot to play some golf today.
Yeah, there was along those lines. I'll share it from a previous podcast. I'm not sure if it was with Paul McGinley or whatever. My mind blurs, but he spoke about his time as a player, and he talked about Colin Montgomery, who was the leading guy around, and he won like 7 Orders of Merit in a row on the European Tour, where Monty, I think, would hit basically 2 balls with each club, whether they were good or bad. So he hit essentially 13 times 2, he hit 26 to about 36 shots. That was that.
Yeah.
Go to the short game area, hit a few shots, a few putts, and then go. So it wasn't this exercise in like I'm swinging with every club until I find something.
Yeah, and I think it should be the purpose should be warming up, and like, you don't want to exhaust yourself, obviously. Right? We're like we kind of said, if the round's gonna be 4.5 hours, why make the first hour before that extra strenuous on you?
That's pretty well.
Probably,
That's
probably not a great idea.
I want to ask you this, because you talk about UNLV. I taught a young golfer, Michael Kirk, who was an All-America there for a while. Turned professional, was successful for a while, and he learned from the coach there. And apparently, it was almost not a hand-me-down from Tiger Woods, but in your warm-up, to hit each shot you think you're going to face over the first 3 holes. So it's like just having that final look before the test. So it's not like hit and drivers and stuff. So if you're going to go driver and 8-iron-ish on the first, you do a couple of those and maybe a few bunker shots. So you touch everything you're likely to face in the first few holes, so nothing hits you kind of unaware when you're out there playing.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot, and it kind of sounds a little Hoganish,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
now, Hogan was obviously one of the all-time practicers, but I'm pretty sure in his rounds he would have had a similar process to that before he went out there. He's planning for the shots he's going to play that day.
How about this? Okay. The first tee shot is that thing that kind of wrecks people mentally. Do you subscribe, or would you advise the thing where you're like, okay, don't try and hit the first tee shot in your mind. And if it doesn't work out, don't stress. At least sort of go about the rehearsal or the repetition of the thing once or twice before you go.
Yeah, and I think you said don't stress. Well, really, you don't want to start a downward spiral before you've even walked over to the first tee, and almost a state of panic that I don't know where this is going. Because I can attest to that's how I played a lot of junior golf, and like I said earlier, I was not the best at my age group or age category. So.
Yeah. I respect your wisdom, so I want to pitch this at you, and then we'll move to the golf course. As I think about it more deeply, which you kind of making me do, I think of the warm-up where most folks are trying to find their best shot. Where some of the great golfers I've been around, when they're warming up, they're just kind of assessing, what do I have available? And if they don't necessarily have their high draw or whatever, they're not going to go and try and pull the trigger on that thing in the first few holes on the golf course. Where are you on that thought?
Yeah, the better players know if they have it or don't have it that day, right? And they're better at managing their games and knowing their misses and knowing where they can miss, and give themselves the best opportunity to basically optimize their score for that day.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, sort of just figuring out, okay, what's available. And if your high draw isn't available, don't use the warm-up time to go and try and find it. See what you're hitting, and then you've got kind of the lady who you've brought to the dance that you're going to go and dance with.
Yeah, and just go out there and have some fun. Be curious what's going to happen shot to shot, right? Like, to me, golf it's situational shot making, and it's all very sequential, right? So we're only really encountering off the tee, approach play, short game putting for the most part. There's obviously some recovery in there, right?
Yeah.
But basically, you're just running through the same cycle over and over and over again. It starts with a situation. They're all slightly different, right? So then you have to basically figure out yardages, determine lies, right? Club selection, all the things that to me is playing golf.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And to your point, a lot of instruction isn't centered on playing golf.
No.
Because the culture is not actually teaching the game on the golf course. It's go to the range, lessons packages, video analysis, and all the awesome technology we still have today. But it creates this whole new phenomenon that isn't really playing golf. It's like ball striking. It's, can I hit the ball more solid? And for me, I think I diverged at a young age where I was more interested in hitting it good than I was about posting a score. Hence why I didn't become the greatest golfer.
What you're saying there, I'm guaranteeing you that the lion's share of folks listening to or watching this are of the same ilk, because that's how we bred nowadays. And I'm finding more and more as my teaching career has wound down, when I do give the odd lesson, so many folks can hit it, they're functional, but they can't play the game. They can't deal with that test, the inevitable test on every shot you talk about that they're likely to face.
Yeah, in golf, you're really just trying to chain together shot after shot after shot, without bogeys blowing up in your face, right? And I think it's only been in the last, I could be exaggerating here, but last number of years where people started thinking more of just bogey avoidance, how to go about that properly, than actually just going all force ahead and trying to make as many birdies or shoot the lowest score. It's kind of inverse almost. And so I think that's a big part of it.
But that's where your approach to it, I'm hoping that unlocks the mindset in people where it's like, there will be a time when I'm hitting that purple patch, because golf rounds, they kind of do this, that I can play a little offense and I go ahead and try and attack. And then there'll be a time, I guarantee you, that it's not working out, and then you're playing that bogey avoidance sort of thing.
Yeah, and when I talk about like situational shot making, right? Like, there's the situation, kind of the way I think of it, just shot selection, so club selection, right? Then obviously you got to set up for whatever shot you're trying to hit, right? And then there's ultimately the swing you make. So there's the shape of a swing you make, right? Which is going to result in specific club delivery and impact, gives you ball flight, right? But now you're at the situation again, the next situation, right? So it just goes around and around and around, right? Now that's unavoidable. It doesn't matter if you're going to shoot 110 or 65,
yeah,
right? But the average golfer is very poor at backtracking and kind of reverse engineering that cycle, right? So they potentially don't know why their ball flight's doing what it should be doing.
Yeah.
They don't know what impact created the ball flight. They don't know why their swing created that impact. They don't know why their setup is not helping or hurting. And then maybe they just picked the wrong club to begin with, or didn't assess the situation all that well. So that's the way I like to kind of simplify it, right? You go clockwise, that's you playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
You go counterclockwise, that's you trying to problem solve your own game, right? And to me, that is very logical, makes a lot of sense, but I don't think most golfers are looking at it in that level of detail.
No, I love that. I truly do. I actually want to camp here a little while longer because I want this to be galvanized in the fans' minds. Because along your lines, I think a lot of folks, they're obviously panicking when stuff's not going right, and then they're halfway trying to problem solve when they're on the course instead of playing the game, and then when they're on the range, instead of being in problem solve mode, a lot of them are just trying to hit one or two good shots to show off to whoever else might be on the range over there. So there's no real focus on what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And then they get on the course and it starts going bad. And then they just start replaying stories based on past experiences, right? Because they've played so poor. Like it starts to relive what you've already done previously. The history starts to come back.
Yeah.
Right. And if you haven't spent enough time kind of in the problem solving part, you aren't understanding why these relationships are occurring, why I'm experiencing all this stuff again, right?
Yeah, like I always do, I typically have a bit of a run of conversation I want to do, but I digress. I mean, we've touched on practice, so we're already onto the course here. So let's move to the course. All that time spent that you highlighted there between shots. I want to talk about the walkers because there's more, and then the folks in the cart. Let's start with the cart folks because the bulk of folks will in the northern United States will be cart drivers.
Yeah, and I think people in carts are usually riding with someone.
Yeah.
Right. So it becomes more conversational,
Mm-hmm.
more recreational, even in a sense. Now, obviously, walkers can walk together and talk and what have you. But one of the things I've noticed, and to your point, not a lot of people walk as much anymore.
Yeah.
And certainly they don't walk with a caddy. And it is actually unbelievable the different experience walking with a caddy is versus carting with a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, go off a little tangent here. I spent some time in Guatemala and I played some golf there.
Yeah.
And of course, it was all caddies. And I didn't grow up with any caddies, right? Like, unless I had a friend caddy for me in a junior tournament or something, right? And a round just flow. I find golf walking with a caddy so much more enjoyable than any other version. Right now, we know why these other versions exist for revenue, time, all these sorts of things. But ultimately, if you're going to go walk, right? I was kind of thinking in my head, say you're playing just a 400 and something par 4, hit one out there, 285, something like that. It's probably going to take you 3 minutes to walk to your ball, right? Let's say you have a 170 yard approach shot. It's another 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's 5 minutes of that hole is just you walking.
Yeah.
Right. And so that gets kind of the point of like, how do you fill that time? And to me, the two things that pop in my mind when I think about how is someone going to fill that time, I think of kind of psychology and I think of physiology.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So now we're thinking thoughts, emotion, behavior. Right. On the physiology side, I'm thinking kind of respiration, breathing, and kind of their visual system.
All right. Mm-hmm.
And so for me, you can't be extremely alert and focused for the 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't know. I think no one's been better at this than Tiger Woods. Right. And I don't know if it's ever really been properly documented how he kind of goes about this. Right. I know a few years ago, Scott Fawcett made a great video where he kind of looked at Tiger's routine, but that was more like him club in hand walking into the ball.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he found that like if you went back and looked at like the year 2000, every time it was like 14, 15 seconds. There was this unique rhythm to it.
Yeah.
Right. But again, that 15 seconds or so is kind of within the 40 seconds permitted to play a shot. Right. It's not really accounting for this 5+ minutes. And then you got to think of you're playing with partners. So they're going to take their time each shot and they're going to hit 3 or 4 or 5 or more shots a hole.
Yeah.
right? So you start adding 2 minutes there, another 2 minutes, before you know it, you're at 12 plus minutes, let's say. So again, it goes back to my original point in that story, my Instagram story, is like 80% of the time how you fill it.
Yeah.
Right. And if I wanted to get really, really good at golf, right? Obviously, we know what the playing side is. That's the situational shot making stuff I talked about. But ultimately, how good are you at controlling your breath?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Because ultimately, the the stress response, right? You hear people talk sympathetic nervous system, so fight, flight, freeze,
Mm-hmm.
parasympathetic, like rest and digest kind of stuff,
Yeah.
right? Well, through a round of golf, to your point, it's kind of this emotional roller coaster. But so you have to be in control of sympathetic sounds confusing, but it's really your alertness level.
Yeah.
Right. Parasympathetic sounds confusing, but it's calmness. So you got to balance alertness versus calmness. And that's kind of what you're trying to do, in my opinion, in the waves of a round and all this time walking, right? Because you just hit a shot, right? So there's going to be some emotional reaction or response to what you just did, either positive or negative, right? And a lot of this is mindset related, right? How optimistic are you? Are you a pessimist? Stuff like that. Confidence, right? One of the best ways I ever heard confidence described was Michael Gervais, who's a world-renowned performance psychologist. And he's just like, it's self-talk. Basically, it's the conversation you have inside your head. So that's a big
so glad
part.
you bring that up. Because I'm thinking about this and my mind's bouncing around the show, and I'm thinking about the cart guys and the walkers, and yes, it's better to walk for a plethora of reasons. But I work on the PGA Tour, right? And a lot of my job is not to tell you what you can see on the monitor. That's why there's an on-course person. If I tell you the ball's landed left to the flag, I'm not doing my job. I've got to tell you what you cannot see or a graphic cannot tell you. So I'm watching between shots a lot. I'm watching routines. I'm watching changes in conditions. And now I'm thinking of a kart driver with, I don't know, maybe his buddy next to him, or if it's in a tournament, someone he doesn't know or she doesn't like, right?
Yeah.
Someone who might want to talk and you're not a big talker, whatever the case might be. The PGA Tour, the LPGA girl, whatever, they have someone on their hip who's on their hip all of the time. It's very infrequently will you see them way out in front or way behind.
Yeah.
And that self-talk you reference, the person on their wing is basically building them up all of the time. If the player is at full flight, you'll see the caddy will just kind of just cruise. But when the person's struggling, that caddy is working hard. And at the self-talk, they lifting their boss up.
Yeah.
When you don't have the luxury of that, you've got to make that happen yourself. Huh?
Absolutely. And I don't think many people are very good at it. Right. So they just, to the phrase the early, downward spiral, right? It just gets worse and worse, and they can't really dig themselves out of it. Now, the beautiful thing about if you work on your breath, right, and really slow it down, right, and if you're conscious of it, that's naturally going to quiet your mind, right? So to me, it's like you hit a shot, you want in the process of the 40 seconds of hitting a shot, you want to be as alert as possible, right? Focus is essential, right? But then after that, you need to add in some relaxation, right? So if you're going to walk for 300 yards, widen your gaze, right? What do we know? If you're really focused, narrow tunnel vision, right? Just going more panoramic with your gaze, that ultimately calms you down, right? If you work, there's all kinds of different breathing techniques, right? From box breathing to, certain, an interesting thing I think of is breaths per minute.
Okay.
Right. And, a lot of these people that work on their breath work can get it down to 5 or 6 breaths per minute.
Yeah, because the slower it is, the less you're panting, so the less you're panicking. Am I correct in my observation?
Yeah, right. So when it goes to the alertness and calmness, like the worst end of alertness, like would be panic.
Yeah.
Right. And calmness would be comatose.
Yeah. All right.
Right. So the breathing to get down to like 5 or 6 breaths per minute is like 6-second inhales and 6-second exhales.
Yeah, man. That's you know what? That takes so much awareness too, because most of us we're breathing so shallow all of the time. Then we're wondering why we're choking. And when you're choking, you essentially haven't oxygenated yourself enough, and stuff doesn't work.
And breathing, to keep it really simple, right? Like if you want to be more alert, you shorten exhales.
Okay.
Okay. If you want to be more calm, you lengthen exhales. So if you, and then say you wanted to really calm down, you might try and double the exhale, right? But you might, to be more alert, you might want to cut the inhale in half, right? And it's all tied to your physiology, basically, right?
Yeah.
And then this would be a tool that people can use. That it's one of the fastest ways I've heard of people being able to help calm themselves down.
Mm-hmm.
And they're called physiological sighs, which basically all that means is as you make the inhale, you double inhale. So halfway through an inhale, you inhale again as deep as you can, and then go into a long exhale.
Almost like a yawn, and then you breathe it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you just do a handful of those, it's one of the quickest ways you can calm down your nervous system, because that's ultimately what we're dealing with, our nervous system.
You know what? You mentioned Tiger earlier, and when you watch Tiger walk on the course, well, not now in the bad leg Tiger version, but his posture was always so tall. It was almost abnormally so when I used to watch him, where I'm the guy who's been carrying a golf bag, and all slouchy all of the time. And when you slouched over, you can't take in as much breath as possible. And if you watch Woods, he never looked down, which was something my college coach didn't allow us to do. The one day we were walking along there, you know, with a double strap on the bag, and you just trudging, walking at your feet, looking at your feet. He's like, lift your gaze, like you said. And out of there, you're in a better place to be able to breathe more deeply, because you open up the airways.
You're definitely expanding that. And you're so right with Tiger. Like, his body language was like legendary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And to your point, like, if you were to look at someone like you standing super tall, shoulders back, excellent body language is like the ultimate sign of confidence.
It's alpha. You know, it's like
alpha.
Tiger, when he walks onto a tee, look, his reputation goes before him, right? When you get the text message on touring, like, oh, sure, Tiger Woods tomorrow, shit. Okay. so he's already in your head a little bit. And then there's the crowds and stuff. But when he walks on the tee, even if he's your buddy, you know, he is the guy. He's holding this I'm in charge stature about him. And it's like, it's so physiological, psychological, not physiological. Physiological to a certain extent. But when you're in this place, you are like, I'm in command. You're playing on my ground right now. And players kind of know it.
Yeah. And certainly in his prime, right? It was so evident. And I've actually, unfortunately, never even seen Tiger play in person, which is odd. But, you know, even to your point, through a two-dimensional camera image, you get the sense, right? He's owning the space.
You can see. I do want to talk also, because, you know, when Bryson went through this like long driving thing, and there was conversation that Bryson was going to be an inflection point and change the game. I'm like, oh, please. So, you know, there have been long hitters before Bryson. Jack Nicklaus was stupid long. But Bryson in the warm-up, when he was into this, before he hooked up with Kyle Berkshire, we taught him to create speed with less violence. Okay. Bryson would be like, and you'd see him panting before the time, and the movements would get animated. And now it gets to that point, and I wanted you to talk about that, where the amount of inhale and the length of that versus exhale, where he was jacking himself up so much before the shot to try and hit this drive so hard and far.
Yeah. And so for me looking at that, like, he's trying to amp up his alertness level, and he's trying to do it through adrenaline. Mm-hmm. And he's controlling his breath work to do it. Right. And that's to really keep it really simple. Right. Mm-hmm. You know, all we are is just this neurochemical being. Right. And so it's actually possible through our behaviors, such as breathing and controlling our visual system to a certain degree, that we can manage these levels, right, and create this alertness and calmness when we need it, right? Ultimately, it's about your state.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And managing that. And
between shots, you managing your state. Yeah, you'd walk along and talk with whoever it is, and you kind of keep it light. But you've also got how about I put it like this? I once said to a young college golfer who was very, very talented, but perennial underachiever because of what was happening when they weren't playing. All right. Yeah. And I said to the young man, I was like, hey, if I gave you a machine that printed $100 bills, and whenever you needed, you could print money that was legit tender, would you look after that? And he was like, heck yes, I would. I'm like, did it ever occur you might be living inside of that machine? And all of a sudden, it sort of dawned on him to say, hell, I can control what I'm doing, how I'm reacting, all the sort of stuff you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think people just need to be presented to them as another skill set that's totally under their control.
True.
Right? Like a lot of people with the tempers and the big emotional reactions feel like they can't control or manage it. It's beyond their control.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, it is not. Right? So that's where you have to just dedicate some time to it. Right? So, and not many people are doing it.
Yeah, look along those lines too. There are different ways to alleviate the nerves. I think the breathing is common, whether you happy-go-lucky, jovial, or whistle while you work kind of guy, or if you're more nose to the grindstone. So breathing is paramount for everyone and doing it properly. But just avoiding the nerves kind of stuff. Do you have any insights? Because look, that's something that everyone faces. And I think the golfers who feel extra nervous feel like they're the only ones in the world that are feeling that way, but everyone else really is. They just might be dealing with it differently.
Yeah, and when I think nerves, I think anxious.
Yeah, right.
And that's just, again, the overactive alertness side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So you aren't quite at the level of panic,
Right.
but you're anxious.
Gotcha.
Right? So you just need to pull yourself back a little bit. So you're going to still use all the same tools to calm yourself down. You just need to notch yourself over to if calmness is on my right, you got to twist the dial a little further this direction. Yeah. So like if I'm standing on the first tee and say I arrive early and the group ahead of me is still teeing off, and say this was competition,
mm-hmm.
I would just be working really hard on my state for those few extra minutes that I'm standing there.
Gotcha.
Right? So just prime yourself for what's to come. But I don't think it needs to be more complicated than understanding some breath stuff. Understanding like a panoramic view is going to help alleviate some of the nerves and the anxiety that's building, right? Yeah. Opposed to more portrait tunnel vision, right? You just need to understand like what happens in your body when you're getting more alert versus what happens when you're trying to be calm, and deals with the respiration, the heart rate, the vision, pupils dilating, and so forth, and that sort of stuff.
I want to talk a little bit, or at least get your take on hydration, because like on the PGA Tour, if golfers watch Justin Thomas, when he's nervous, he drinks more water. You'll see him, he is sipping water after every shot he hits. And that's massively important to me for continual success. I want your take there, because between shots, I don't think the average golfer is fueling themselves or hydrating themselves enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the easiest way to go about that is to try and kind of be continuous throughout the round of golf.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like what JT is doing, right? It's
mm-hmm.
regardless of there's a certain amount of water he wants to consume through a round of golf. It makes the most sense to just gradually and incrementally consume it.
Yeah.
Not to be like played 5 holes and be like, oh my God, I haven't had any water.
Yeah.
Right? So you're trying, again, manage your state, manage energy, fatigue levels, that sort of thing. That's ultimately what it kind of comes down to in these in-between shot scenarios is my state, energy levels, avoiding fatigue, right?
Interesting. Right. I've kept you for a long time, but I got to go to practice a little bit. I have in the past with my brother when he was young, because he tended slow. Okay, I'll just call it like it is. Because he was always concerned about the shot and overthink and checking wind a bunch and stuff like that. So we developed a pre-shot routine that was on a timer. And you talked about Tiger, essentially might not do the same thing all the time, but it was the same amount of time. This is something that can be practiced, and I feel like should be practiced. What say you?
You're talking about practicing this kind of pre-shot routine?
When you're at home and you have some time to practice. Now, you're on the range, don't just fire away 30 balls in your 25 minutes. Work on the entire cycle to go back to your analogy.
Yeah, and I like to think of practice, I like to use the word bouts, right? Like short, intense period of activity is basically the definition of a bout, okay. Right? Yeah. And it also kind of gives you the idea that you're going to get something done, right? There's a plan in mind, there's an intention in mind, and you know beforehand what I'm going to get done. So given the time that I have available, it could be as little as 20 minutes. 30 minutes, 45, 60, whatever it is,
Yeah.
you know what you're going to do, which means you kind of have to build it into your days, right? So I like to think sometimes with, say, amateur golfers, life's crazy, right? Probably have family, wife, job. So then I like to think about how many like non-work waking hours do they have, right? And when you kind of go through their day, you're probably going to come up with like 4 or 5.
Yeah, right.
If you're lucky, right? So then you have to get a commitment from them that are you willing to basically spend maybe 10% of those non-work waking hours on golf, right? And then we're going to create a daily bout for you to work on that. And the goal is to have them compound over time and accumulate, right? And so, that can be, like I said, 20 or 30 minutes, but you got to know what you're going to do in that 20 or 30 minutes. And to your point, you got to try and make it mimic or reflect the game you're actually going to be playing and not derail into just smashing balls. Right? So
you make it sound so simple. You make it sound so logical and so simple, and people will be listening to you going, "Jeez, yeah." When you're having this mind explosion, then they get to the course this afternoon and they don't do what you've just been talking about.
Yeah. So for me, it's like, okay, it's got to go on the calendar almost if it's going to be productive.
Yeah.
Right. So you think of the old, like the W's from writing back in the day.
Where, what,
when, what. Though you need to answer those questions internally, right? And so, like, there's been, tremendous books written on habits, but that's ultimately what you're trying to form here, right? And there is really no, if you read a lot of these books, there's no one set rule for how long it takes to form a habit.
No.
Right? There's too much involved in it, right? But basically, there is some pretty good evidence what it takes to change your brain, right? There's that big fancy word, neuroplasticity, right? The ability of the brain to change itself, right? Well, when you get older, they like to say kind of above 25, your brain is not as plastic, obviously, as it was when you were a kid, right? Like kids are sponges. They just soak up anything they can learn on the fly, even if they aren't even necessarily paying that much attention.
Okay.
Well, if you're going to learn things later in life, there's certain kind of phases that you need to go through or the plasticity is not going to open up, right? So if people are just doing repetitions, right? Just bashing ball, you're not learning anything. You'll never learn anything because you haven't created the conditions and the environment for it to occur, right? So basically, if you got 20 or 30 minutes, these windows are basically based on actions. So for example, the most important thing is back to the state.
Yeah.
You need to, if you're going to start that bout, alertness is key, right? But even before alertness, you need clarity, right? Clear mind, then calm yourself down and then tune into the alertness, right? And you can do that through breath work. And you can do it in seconds, right? So once you have the alertness is, again, back, we already talked about it a bit, but it's tied to your adrenaline. So if you get the adrenaline going, now you're starting to wake the brain up. It's getting interested and there might be something here to learn, right? But that's not enough to actually, for learning to occur. Now you need to have focus, right? Because focus creates another neurochemical, acetylcholine, to now start highlighting specific certain circuits in the brain for what the change is going to be to occur.
Yeah.
But now, really, the key to learning is making errors, right? And the problem with this, and this is why people do not get better, is as you make errors, what is the natural thing that happens? People become frustrated and agitated. That is uncomfortable. Then they quit.
Yeah.
But the agitation and frustration is really the cocktail in your brain just getting dialed in. So it means once you feel that, because you're in pursuit of something, you need enough feedback to know, okay, was that an error? But what am I trying to do?
Yeah.
What's correct? What's the error? Right? So you need enough feedback, but then you need to continue the reps through the agitation, the frustration, because now your brain is working in your favor. You're now going to be at a chemical advantage to make it occur. And then, the conversation can go into, a lot further than that. Obviously, basically, the neurochemical that really lays down the change is dopamine.
Yeah.
Dopamine's all about anticipation of reward.
Yeah.
The motivation and drive to do it correct because you're making these errors, and keep going, right? And the very interesting thing, I'll finish with this point, is you're actually, the learning and change in your brain does not occur until sleep. So the change in the brain occurs at sleep. So it's rest, right? So, which makes it kind of blows your mind, because you could be like, well, maybe I just did a 60-minute lesson with this guy and he's got me doing all these different things. But it's important to realize you didn't really learn anything there. Like, the learning did not occur there. You might have consumed information, but if you didn't do enough of these reps and make enough errors, neurologically, it's not occurring. So,
wow, I'm glued and I'm hanging on every word you say. I just want to put a capper on this, and I'd like your final thoughts. Like, you're talking about the brain involvement and the focus and the altered state, the improved state that you find yourself in practice. And that's just not bashing balls, it's being there completely. That's where, to me, going to practice with a goal in mind is crucial, because the brain responds to goals. And if you remain true to this goal, whatever it might be, don't go changing in the practice. Go there with the one intention, stick to it no matter how it's going, then you get into this place you're talking about, correct?
absolutely. Like, what's the one thing? What's the one thing I'm working on today?
Yeah.
And if you kind of have, if your bout is so regimented, it just flows one thing into the other. But if you know why, right? It's like, okay, obviously you would warm up quickly in the same to practice, but then you need to flow through these points of calmness, alertness, attention and focus, right? And then action, and that's very deliberate action, right? That goes to the traditional idea of deliberate practice. Anders Ericsson, right, wrote the great book Peak on that.
Okay.
So basically, he noted deliberate practice, right? But kind of what I just talked about is like, what's going on behind the scenes when you're deliberately practicing? Because if you're not deliberately practicing, none of the brain change stuff is going to occur. And deliberate practice has a pretty specific definition, and it almost means the coach is involved, like the coach is helping you manage your development and growth, right? And we know how many people don't even do that. I think I've heard thrown around, people say 10% of people, golfers, take instruction. I don't know how accurate that number is, but I hear that a lot. But it could be even lower than that. Yeah, then take the ones that take instruction, and then what do they do on their own time? And now, all bets are off.
That's the sweet spot to me, because, like, look, I'm in a phase now in my life where golf went away because I was so busy, but now my schedule's allowing me in the fall to work on it some. And when I go to the range at our club, I see it looks like mayhem. There might be 15, 20 golfers out there hitting, and there's nothing, there's no mental, physical, emotional engagement. There's no goal. The goal is to hopefully hit one or two flush, but it's never the why or the how. It's just like hit, hope.
And there's no feedback.
No.
So they're ultimately clueless, unfortunately, because they hit a certain shot, right? And if they don't even know the relationships that are creating certain shots, now it's time to guess, right? And tinker. Now we're in tinker mode.
Listen to your bud who comes walking over, who doesn't know what he or she is saying anyway, but he's going to tell you to keep your head down or something random.
It's like, I remember the last time when I was still working at a private club teaching, group of guys, late 60s probably, play their rounds, always meet afterwards, but they're always talking golf swing, right? They're always talking, watch this YouTube video, that's my favorite guy on Instagram, whatever. And so they build up this narrative of what they think they're doing wrong, right? But they have no feedback or proof of what actually is occurring, right? It's not like they went on a launch monitor or any of this other technology to diagnose, right? So I remember one guy came and took a lesson from me. And of course, I broke it down very logically, ball flight related. Well, if that's the ball flight you want, then this impact needs to occur. And if you want that impact, just backtracking, I work backwards, right? And he just kind of finished the lesson, and he thought, he looked like lost, dazed out in the sky, and he just said, wow, that wasn't anything like what I thought it was. Right? And that's kind of, unfortunately, a lot of golfers.
And wonderful stuff. I think an area that we could probably mine a whole lot more, but I've got to scoot. I know you're busy. Folks want to find you. Is there a website? I know the social media. Please share.
Let's just go with Instagram for now. So Teague Balen Golf on Instagram. And that's probably the easiest way to find me. websites, I'm doing some work on my website at the moment, so I think it's down at the moment. But yeah.
And Teague is Teague, and Balen is Balen. Teague. You've kept me fascinated. I've loved this chat. I'm so thankful that you would join us. Appreciate you, man.
Awesome, Mark. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.